The Untold History, a podcast by the Hispanic Council, with the collaboration of the Spanish Ministry of Defense, to get to know great Spanish figures in the history of the United States. Today, Jorge and David Farragut. Those who have read Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea will remember Commodore Farragut, one of the central characters of the novel, who was a seasoned and brave Marine. This fearless and experienced seaman is inspired by the first Admiral of the U.S. Navy, David Farragut. David was originally baptized as James Farragut, and he was the son of Jorge Farragut, a Menorcan maritime merchant who sailed a modest vessel along the route between Veracruz, Mexico, and New Orleans. His passes through North America allowed him to catch wind of the revolutionary airs that blew over the British colonies, and he ended up joining the insurgents in their War of Independence. He was appointed as a Marine lieutenant, and he fought the English in the battles of Savannah, Cowpens, and Wilmington. In the middle of his bellicose activities, he also had time to marry a North American woman of Irish origin, Elizabeth Shine, and they had a son that they named James, but will be David as time passed. James Faragut was born in Tennessee in 1801, in a small town that is now named after him. The struggle for U.S. independence kept him far from his father during his childhood. After the war and the purchase of the Spanish Louisiana by the United States, there were job openings for state workers who could speak Spanish or French, which is why the Farragut family, including little James, moved to New Orleans. In 1808, Elizabeth, James's mother, died of yellow fever. With the death of his wife and his continuous absences, his father decided to cede James's custody to his best friend, another Marine called David Porter. To honor his stepdad, with whom he had a special relationship, he abandoned his birth name, James, in favor of David, the name with which he has gone down in history. David had a father and stepfather who were Marines, so it was natural for him to follow a profession that was oriented to the sea and the military life. So, at just 9 years old, he enlisted as a midshipman. He didn't wait long for his baptism by fire. In the War of 1812, the ship that he was assigned to, the Essex, engaged the British, capturing the English ship HMS Alert. David was tasked with taking the seized ship to the port as the prey endowment officer. David continued his career and received his first command in 1824 on board the USS Farragut, as part of a small fleet dedicated to persecuting pirates in the Occidental Indies, the place where he spent the first part of his profession. During the North American intervention in Mexico, in 1847, David took charge of the sloop of war USS Saratoga. He left from Norfolk, Virginia, to place himself under the command of Commodore Matthew Perry, who ordered him to reinforce the naval blockade of Tuxpan, located at the north of Veracruz. It was on this task where yellow fever came to give more trouble to David for a second time. The first time, it had taken his mother. In its second visit, it affected a good part of his crew, although he, once again, was untouched by the disease. The infection forced him to retreat to the port of Pensacola and disembark most of his troop, making him have an unimportant role in the mission. But opportunities to shine will present themselves to Farragut. A new and terrible struggle will give him time to show his skills as a Marine. The American Civil War. Despite his southern origins, Farragut considered any act of secession implied treason. So, he aligned with the northern states led by Abraham Lincoln against the Confederate states that proclaimed independence. As a veteran officer, he was ordered the command of the squad tasked with the Union's blockade at the western side of the Gulf of Mexico. with orders of entering the Mississippi River and capturing New Orleans, a cornerstone in the supply of the Confederate Army. The idea of his superiors was that, leading his fleet, he'd plow the forts that gave access to the river. But he had his own plans. David was not a young official, but he understood the radical changes of the times he lived. The Industrial Revolution had brought numerous innovations in different fields, and naval war was no exception. Our protagonist was one of the first to see and use the capabilities brought by the new advancements, such as the new armored ships, the role of mines, the high-caliber, high-reach naval cannons, and the steam motor. All of these improvements, and some others, were modifying sea warfare, and he implemented them perfectly. Thus, he did not attack the forts. He decided to do a night incursion through the crossfire, trusting that the new armor and speed of his ships would turn it into an acceptable passage, while the continuous battering of his impressive three-masted vessel, the Hartford, and some other lesser boats that accompanied him would put enough pressure on the defenders inside the forts that they could not focus too much on their own efforts. He was right. He managed to enter the port with little damage, and there he sunk the Confederate squad, which were anchored with confidence that their forts would be enough to protect them. Without naval opposition, the Union troops easily disembarked and took New Orleans. This victory motivated the United States Congress to create and give to Faragut the position of Rear Admiral. The victory over New Orleans, however, would not be the greatest of our hero. That position corresponds to that of Mobile Bay in 1864. Mobile was the last important port left to the Confederates. Therefore, it had heavy defenses, including a minefield at its entrance. Faragut ordered the entrance of the fleet in 2 columns, with ships that had reinforced bows at the front. He knew that they would better resist the explosions of mines and could make way for the others. One of them exploded and sunk, the Tecumseh. The column stopped, and David asked the reason for their halt. The crew responded loudly, "Torpedoes," to which he answered the famous phrase, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." He managed to enter the bay and face the forts and the ironclad Tennessee that protected it, but he forced them to surrender. For this war action, David was promoted to Vice Admiral, and later, in 1866, after the war, to Admiral, the first person to hold that position in the United States Navy. Ill health prevented him from continuing his career. He died in 1870 in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. He was buried in Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, New York, next to a lichen commemorating the first admiral of the U.S. Navy, the man who inspired Jules Verne. As many as 5 different ships have borne the name David Faragut. The latest USS Faragut is a powerful Arleigh Burke-class destroyer and was launched in 2004. The third of them, launched in 1932, was at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Her crew managed to get out of the harbor and sailed amidst bombs and torpedoes across the bay, making good use of her anti-aircraft guns against the Japanese bombers. The crew was awarded the Bronze Star for bravery, after demonstrating that there is no trap or enemy fire that can frighten a Faragut.